The Honorable Pennelope Beckles, Leader of the Opposition and Leader of the People's National Movement, as well as Member of Parliament for Arima. Senator Dr. Amery Browne, Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate. The Honorable Colm Imbert, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin North East. And the Honorable Keith Scotland, SC, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for joining us for another opposition press conference in defense of the people. As we know, there are quite a few elements happening around us, issues and matters that are showing that there's clearly an attack on the democracy of Trinidad and Tobago by this government. And there are many things affecting our everyday lives currently, and there are things that will affect our lives that are beginning to materialize. So to begin our press conference today, we welcome the Honorable Colm Imbert, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin North East, to address some of these matters.
Thank you very much. Good morning, political leader. Thank you very much, political leader and my colleagues. There are so many things to talk about in Trinidad and Tobago today that we could spend a very long time here. So I will just focus on three burning issues. The first issue I would like to focus on is the astonishing claim that the unemployment rate in Trinidad and Tobago has gone down. Now, when I look at what the Central Statistical Office is telling us, the numbers make absolutely no sense. By way of example, and this is under this new government, and I don't believe the numbers under this new government. Very unfortunate, but I simply don't believe them. And I will prove to you that the numbers are inaccurate. The CSO has reported that between April and September of 2025, 12,000 persons lost their jobs in Trinidad and Tobago. And these job losses are attributed to CPEP, URP, the National Reforestation Program, and workers from regional health authorities, HDC, water and sewerage people working in CPEP, 7,500 people working at any given time in URP, 4,500 people at any given time in the reforestation program. And if you want to add those three numbers I just gave you, that's 23,000. I have not included the people who were sent home from WASA, from HDC, from the RHAs, and from many other government departments. I have not included people who lost their jobs in the private sector, because there are many small businesses that have closed down in 2025 for many reasons, one of them being the dismissal of those 23,000 workers in those three programs. And they were all consumers, and they lost their purchasing power, and therefore they were unable to buy consumer items, buy food at retail outlets, pay their rent, pay their higher purchase obligations, and so on. So this had a domino effect on many small businesses in Trinidad and Tobago. So we've heard figures bandied about, but we know it's at least 30,000 people that lost their jobs. And as I said, if you just add those three programs alone, you get 23,000. So why on earth is the CSO trying to tell us that only 12,000 people lost their jobs? And when I look at the narrative coming out of the CSO, I see that they're being very creative. They are calculating the unemployment rate based on people looking for work. Now, I can assure you that every single one of those 23,000 people is looking for work, but they're not appearing in the data sets coming out from the CSO in terms of people looking for work. Apparently, only a couple thousand people were looking for work in the last half of 2025, when we know it's 25 to 30,000. So I would call on the government to deal with this, because we know it's not true. We know it's unbelievable. We know it's inaccurate, and they're just creating a false picture with statistics. And this is typical of this UNC, all of the incarnations of the UNC, the Pandey administration, the previous Bissessar administration, the same thing. Always cooking the books. So I will call upon them to do their work properly and give us truthful statistics in terms of the labor force and in terms of the number of people without jobs. There's a recent astonishing claim, so that is for the third quarter 2025. For the fourth quarter, miraculously 8,000 people were hired. I can't imagine where are these jobs. Businesses closing down everywhere, but 8,000 people were hired. Nonsense. And I'm seeing this attempt to cook the books throughout. I see it in the Ministry of Finance. I see in the review of the economy published in October of 2025 by the current Minister of Finance, laid in the Parliament by the UNC, that according to that document, the economy contracted in 2025 by minus 0.8%. And yet 2 months later, somehow the minus sign turned into a plus sign, and we're being told that the economy grew by plus 0.8% in 2025. Both numbers can't be right. And the unfortunate thing is this is the data they give to the international agencies. And it's unfortunate the international agencies are not doing the necessary due diligence to check these numbers, because they used to do that with us. They would look at my budget statements, my review of the midterm, look at what we are publishing prior to meeting with them, and if there was an inconsistency, they would interrogate us. I don't know why they didn't interrogate the UNC when they cooked the books and went from minus 0.8 to plus 0.8 in a matter of months. So it's an overall attempt at deception of deceiving the public, but they're fooling no one, because the 30,000 people who are unemployed know that they lost their jobs. The other burning issue I'd like to deal with is the crisis in terms of allocations in government departments and public bodies, particularly local government bodies, in terms of the amount of money that is required to pay wages and salaries. Now, the UNC did a number of things. In the budget of 2025, October for 2026, there was no allocation made for the 10% increase in salaries for public servants or for daily rated workers. But subsequent to that, we saw a number of collective agreements were finalized with a number of unions. I'll start with the Public Service Association. The government finalized an arrangement with them after the budget for an additional $420 million annually in recurrent expenditure. That's not in the budget. $3.8 billion in back pay arising from the 10% for public servants. In addition to that, in February, I believe, let me get the exact date. Yes, it's in February. The government finalized another 10% increase with daily rated workers. That's going to cost the state $2.6 billion in back pay and add $252 million annually to the national wage bill. So you take those two numbers together, you're getting almost $700 million in wages and salaries that was not catered for in the 2026 budget, for which there is no allocation. And you also have back pay of about $6 billion from what I've just counted out there. And they made a partial payment of back pay in December. And what they did to local government bodies is they told them they have to pay it. So corporations like the Port of Spain City Corporation and so on were instructed to pay the first installment of the back pay and also pay the increased salaries without an allocation. So You reach now to May of 2026, and this is what is happening in the Port of Spain Corporation. I'm just giving you one example of what is happening here. The Port of Spain Corporation finds itself, and it was already in difficulty in terms of having its budget for scavenging, for garbage collection, drastically reduced. And it finds itself in a situation where there are now shortfalls across the board in basically every single vote in the Port of Spain Corporation. They find themselves being told by the Ministry of Local Government to take money that is allocated for other things, such as the development program for repairing roads and dealing with water courses and so on, and transfer it into the personal expenditure vote to pay this increased salary and to pay this back pay. So the first attack on P&M corporations in particular was to drastically reduce the allocation for scavenging, for garbage collection in 2026 from the 2025 factor. And the next attack was to tell them they have to pay the 10% without an allocation. And now the Ministry of Local Government is moving money out of the corporations from critical areas and telling them that has to be used to pay for these things, because what has happened is there's been no midterm review. We're in June, and there's no midterm review. We have a sitting of Parliament on Friday, and it's not on the order paper. And there is a requirement now for a supplementation of appropriation bill. Has to happen. The minister has to come and add at least $1 billion to deal with these back pay issues and to deal with the 10% that has been given to both daily paid workers and also monthly paid workers. You have the situation with WASA, where WASA was under-provided for by hundreds of millions of dollars. WASA is going to run out of money anytime now. They're going to need another $300, $400, $500 million, especially with the new hires at WASA, 400 additional workers at WASA. So the minister is going to have to come to the Parliament very soon, within the next 2 weeks, and add a couple billion, maybe $3, $4 billion to the budgetary allocation for 2026. But because he hasn't done that yet, you have corporations who are simply running out of money. There are several corporations, particularly P&M corporations, who will not be able to pay their workers at the end of this month of June. So that is another crisis waiting to happen. Not only do they not have the money to pay salaries and wages, but they are losing their allocation for the development program. I saw the Samuel Lavantil Corporation sent me some information this morning. They had funding in their development program to build a building for the municipal police and to do a lot of infrastructure work. And like a thief in the night, the local government ministry has just deleted that from their allocation and transferred it into the Ministry of Local Government, taking it out of the Samuel Lavantil Corporation's budgetary allocation. Just gone. Just with a stroke of a pen. Just take it out, gone, and send a memo to Samuel Lavantil telling you, oh, by the way, we just took several $1 million out of your budget for roads and drains and for development projects, and we're going to use it for something else. The other thing, disturbing thing I'm seeing, is that the Minister of Local Government started an employment program. You will see them around. It's supposed to be a replacement for CPEP, but it's employing maybe 5% of the people that used to be employed in CPEP. And it's supposed to be funded by a fund called the Employment Fund, which the Minister of Finance made a big song and dance about in October 2025. Now, all of a sudden, corporations, one by one, P&M corporations are being communicated with to say, we take in money from your allocation to pay for those workers. So the Ministry of Local Government is employing people. They're giving corporations the opportunity to have a say in maybe 20% of the workers. The ministry is keeping for itself the power to employ 80% of these workers. And they're now telling the corporation, and you have to pay for it. So these are workers not employed by the corporations, which now have to be paid for by the corporation. That's another crisis waiting to happen because it's just taking money from everywhere, from every critical budgetary allocation in corporations, taking it out to deal with these issues that they have created, increase in salaries, employment of people by the Ministry of Local Government. So that is a second item, and that is a crisis waiting to happen. And the third one will be also what's going on with the maxi taxis. And let me tell you what happened with the meeting on Monday with the Minister of Transport. He told the maxi taxi operators categorically that he will not commit to any solutions in writing whatsoever. No timeline, no promises, nothing. He's not going to tell them anything. The issues that they are upset about is the transfer of maxi taxi rights to next of kin. This is not even to third parties. This is to a father wants to pass on a maxi taxi to his son and so on because he's too old now to drive the maxi. The minister said he ain't dealing with that. The question of dealing with Citygate, I was the Minister of Works that established Citygate in 1995. Obviously, 30 years later, Citygate needs some kind of upgrade. But apparently, there is no allocation to deal with Citygate or the hub in Arima. The question of the speed limit. There are arguments for and against. The argument for having a lower speed limit for maxi taxis is based on the fact that maxi taxis carry a significant number of passengers, and there are safety considerations in terms of the distance you need for coming to a stop and the general safety of a public service vehicle with a number of passengers. And that is why the speed limit for maxi taxis has always been lower than for private cars. But the speed limit for private cars was increased to 100 kilometers an hour for the highways. So if you could take the speed limit on the highways from 80 kilometers to 100 kilometers, why can't send up the maxi taxi speed from 65 kilometers an hour to maybe 70 or 75 kilometers an hour? Think about it. Those of you who, like me, still think in miles, 65 kilometers an hour is only 40 miles an hour. So you could imagine a maxi taxi is going down the highway, but it has to stay at 40 miles an hour. But the private cars going all around them could go at 100 kilometers an hour, which is 62 miles an hour. Obviously, there's going to be an issue. Obviously. And I think it is quite justifiable with the speed limit having been increased from 80 kilometers an hour to 100 kilometers an hour for private cars, that there should be some consideration given to increasing the speed for maxi taxis, maybe by 5 kilometers, maybe by 10 kilometers. It will make a big difference. But the minister said no, not dealing with that. The question of school concessionaires, because there are taxis that provide transportation for school children. They haven't been paid for months. The amount owed now is $7 million owed to the maxi taxis that provide transportation for school children. And these are small businessmen. What do you expect them to do if you're not paying them? And I see in The Guardian today, I'm assuming it's accurate, that, where's The Guardian? I'm assuming it's accurate. Ministers pass the buck on responsibility for maxi taxi hubs. Typical in Trinidad and Tobago. You know, I filed a question in the Parliament with respect to a development project in my constituency to upgrade the Maraval Recreation Ground. Contract awarded by the Land Settlement Agency before the general election. As soon as the UNC came in, they stopped the project. So I filed a question and say, what's going on with this project? They say, oh, land settlement is now under a different minister. And you're supposed to know that, so you're not answering the question. So they love to do this kind of thing. So between Jolene John and Eli Zako, none of them taking responsibility for the condition of the maxi taxi hubs in the country. Typical UNC. So we had a shutdown on Monday, a partial shutdown yesterday. Obviously, the maxi taxi drivers and owners, they're not rich people. so they can't stay off the roads forever. They're making a point. I have never seen this kind of action before from maxi taxi operators. And it is based on the approach of this government. This is a government of contempt. Every time you try to deal with an issue, they are contemptuous. I have a pothole in my constituency on Saddle Road, blocking up traffic for hours. I've been talking about it in Parliament for 1 year. I've raised matters on the adjournment 3 times. To the point now the speaker tell me you raised that enough, I wouldn't approve it anymore. But the pothole still there is about 5 feet by 5 feet. 1 year. And when you talk to them in Parliament, they're laughing, they're kicking, they're carrying on. The Minister of Public Utilities is just dancing around, will not answer the question. It's a government of contempt. So when I spoke to the maxi taxi drivers, I asked them, what's the real problem? It's the man attitude. It's a whole year they're talking to this new Minister of Transport. And he just dancing and he dodging and he refusing and he saying, not me. For example, the issue of PH maxis. He said, not me, that's police. But he was told by the maxi taxi drivers, what nonsense you talking? You have traffic wardens that report to you. You have licensing officers that report to you. So you have licensing officers with powers of arrest and making charges and fines and so on. You have traffic wardens who could issue ticket. All of them reporting to you. Their sole purpose is to deal with traffic management, but it's not your responsibility. They say they describe the man as totally disconnected. And that is so typical of all these ministers. Julian John disconnected. I don't know what happened to her. She used to be somebody with some kind of reputation. She gone through, can't patch a pothole. Padarad just running around, leaks everywhere, people starving for water everywhere. And when you try to talk to these people, all you get is arrogance. So I could talk here for hours, but I think I've said enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you, the Honourable Colm Imbert. And it leads the question to the Minister of Transport, if he has ever taken a bus route maxi in his life. Is that part of the reason why he's so disconnected from the realities of the maxi taxi drivers and the citizens that use the maxi taxis every day? Again, we are seeing threats to our democracy from this current administration, even distancing ourselves from our regional alliances. Now, to touch on some of this, we now welcome Senator Dr. Amery Browne to speak on these matters.
Thank you very much, Brother Hans, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West. I recognize the leader of the opposition and the political leader of the People's National Movement, our leader, Pennelope Beckles Robinson, and 2 parliamentary colleagues, Member of Parliament Colm Imbert and Member of Parliament Keith Scotland. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. I want to take you back to the 26th of February 2028, when Trinidad and Tobago plunged CARICOM into a crisis of our own making, a crisis of Trinidad and Tobago's making, when our Prime Minister, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, made the decision to leave a CARICOM heads meeting early and absent herself from the heads retreat on the island of Nevis. Members of this population and members of the media have not achieved any response from the Prime Minister on the key question as to why she made that decision. What we've seen since then is a Herculean effort to cover up that decision, piling on question, controversy, issue after issue on the doorsteps of other people, such as the then chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Secretary General of CARICOM, and all and sundry, as opposed to Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister, answering with respect to her responsibility. the opposition has said it before, the taxpayers of this country sent her to that meeting to represent Trinidad and Tobago to its completion. She made the decision to leave the CARICOM heads early, resulting in Trinidad and Tobago's absence from the retreat in Nevis. And then they subsequently complained to high heavens about what essentially was her decision. So we are encouraging the media to continue to press for a reason for that decision by the Prime Minister. Now, there are consequences flowing from that continue to affect the regional community and Trinidad and Tobago to this day. What I can tell you without fear of contradiction is since then, Trinidad and Tobago has not been represented at any CARICOM meeting, whether at the heads of government level, and there have been several, including those requested by Trinidad and Tobago. We also have not been represented at the ministerial level at any of CARICOM's organs since February 26th. And the question to this UNC government is this: is this the new normal for Trinidad and Tobago? And how long do they intend to continue with that degree of irresponsibility? Further, has the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, abdicated on her responsibility under the CARICOM quasi-cabinet for regional security? It's a simple question. Has she abdicated that role and abandoned that role? The evidence would indicate that that is exactly what has happened. Further, what happens in 2028 when Trinidad and Tobago assumes by rotation the chairmanship position of the Caribbean community? At that point, you will have, if God frowns on us and we continue to sit and suffer under this UNC government led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar, we'll have a prime minister in the form of Kamla Persad-Bissessar, who will be chairman of CARICOM at that time, and we will have Secretary General of CARICOM, duly reappointed, fully accepted by the community, and endorsed as Secretary General of the Caribbean community. And I invite the national and regional population to think ahead as to what will happen during that particular period. We do not believe that these are premature questions. These are matters of policy involving Trinidad and Tobago, and the government has a duty to present answers and clarity on these matters. Further, what are the implications of Trinidad and Tobago's non-participation for the organs of CARICOM? What are these organs of CARICOM to which I refer? There are a number of examples. For example, the Caribbean Examinations Council. These are some of the things that we take for granted. I see some persons, trolls on social media saying, well, what does CARICOM do for we? What does CARICOM do for us? Every single day, we, the people of this country, benefit from our participation, contribution, and support for the Caribbean community. So the CXC is one example. What are the implications for Trinidad and Tobago's continuing participation and benefit from the Caribbean Examinations Council? There is the COTED, the Council for Trade and Economic Development, with implications for the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, all our exporters, manufacturers, distributors within Trinidad and Tobago and the wider region. What are the implications of this reckless and irresponsible posture from Trinidad and Tobago for our participation and membership in COTED? There's COFCOR, there's the Council for Human and Social Development, there's CONSLAE, the Council for National Security and Law Enforcement, there's the Legal Affairs Committee of CARICOM, on which our Attorney General, every Attorney General in the community sits on the Legal Affairs Committee. when we demitted office, working on key legislation, regional arrest warrant, model legislation that can help, besides all the posturing and rhetoric, in the fight against narcotics, the ability to counteract trans-border crime, etc. These are active bodies of work. Trinidad and Tobago, with its reckless posturing, is putting all of this work in danger and is in a position to deny this country of the benefits of these regional entities. The Caribbean Meteorological Association, a vital part of the chain of events here, where our farmers or airlines, the other participants in the national community are able to get a proper forecast and information from the regional level filtering to the national level. The Caribbean Public Health Agency, which we referenced very recently, in the era of Ebola and other emerging threats around the world, including in Latin America and the Caribbean. These organs of CARICOM that we sometimes take for granted, that work in the background, are essential for our safety, our development, and our future. That's the way the system is set up. Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know if you can call it a plan. If it's a plan, it's written on the back of a copybook by a child. Very reckless and irresponsible posturing is putting our citizens, our institutions, our organizations, ordinary workers and people of this country in danger of either missing out or having our health, safety, and development impeded by this very irresponsible position. Again, all stemming from what seems to be a very trite, a very petty, and very irresponsible decision by the current Prime Minister, which she has yet to face the people of this country and explain. Everything else that you've heard on this issue from Minister Sobers, the Prime Minister, and all the other little talking heads is smoke and mirrors. It boils down to that question that I presented right at the beginning. I also want to touch on something that's taking place today, a very important development occurring at the United Nations General Assembly, where there is voting underway right now. In fact, it's gotten to the point of tallies. And we anticipate, as we said before, Trinidad and Tobago is uncontested for a non-permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. So that part was not in controversy. But we've been warning this government that for the last year, its positions, its statements, its declarations touching on issues of international law, global peace and security will have implications for our tenure. It's a 2-year tenure from the 1st of January 2027 to the 31st of December 2028. So I anticipate there will be lots of glorification and claims of credit, and I see already one MP on the UNC side is saying it was the Prime Minister's atrocious and reckless speech at the United Nations that has somehow resulted in Trinidad and Tobago gaining the seat. That is absolute rubbish. The die was cast for this years ago. The People's National Movement administration did its part. We achieved cabinet approval of this candidature, formal approval of the cabinet. We achieved the drafting and preparation of our campaign strategy and all the other elements that are essential. We achieved CARICOM endorsement, which is a fundamental pillar of the success of a Security Council non-permanent seat, without which we'll be having a very different conversation. And I want you to think, based on what I've just said and what you already know, without those efforts and application of the former PNM administration, we could be having a very different scenario today. So that CARICOM endorsement was achieved in advance of all of these reckless attacks on CARICOM that the UNC has been perpetrating. So when you talk about the sequence of events, I would invite members of the population to look at this with honesty and transparency and not fall for the usual UNC smoke and mirrors game. But it's achieving a non-permanent seat on the Security Council is not an end in itself. It is to be a means to an end. It is recognized. This will be Trinidad and Tobago's second opportunity to serve at that level. I remind the national community that in 2023, we achieved a historic first, where for the first time, we sat as President of the General Assembly in the form of Ambassador Dennis Francis. That was a first. And Trinidad and Tobago conducted itself with distinction during that period. The first time we served on a non-permanent seat on the Security Council was during the period January 1st, 1985 to December 31st, 1986. This will be the second opportunity. The difference between then and now is the world is a lot more complicated today. The geopolitical realities are extremely sensitive, and the government of Trinidad and Tobago has already demonstrated their total incompetence and inability to manage such responsibilities with respect to our foreign policy. I'll give you two quick examples that should concern and worry all of us. One is Trinidad and Tobago's very recent decision to flee the General Assembly Hall and not be present to participate in a key vote on climate change, a vote at the General Assembly on an ICJ advisory opinion on climate change, which really seeks to hold larger countries to account for their disproportionate contribution to the climate impact on the global community, including small island developing states. We didn't vote yes, we didn't vote no, we didn't vote to abstain, which is a vote at the General Assembly as a former. After that absence in Nevis, when hostilities broke out in Iran, a very bizarre series of events occurred in Port-of-Spain, where for the first time, the foreign ministry of this country found itself putting out a public bulletin endorsing and supporting the outbreak of military conflict in the Middle East. Those are flashpoints, checkpoints that others in the diplomatic community are noting, just to say that Trinidad and Tobago's tenure will be followed extremely closely in this region, around the world, and right here by this opposition of Trinidad and Tobago, and we will continue to hold the government to account. The final issue that I would refer to, speaking of unfortunate decisions, is the complete departure and reversal of Trinidad and Tobago's long-standing principled position with respect to the Republic of Cuba. Some of the issues are now well familiar to the national community, but once again, Trinidad and Tobago was represented at an organ of CARICOM, COFCO, which comprises the foreign ministers of all the countries of CARICOM, engaged in significant discussions and achieved a consensus position on Cuba. A very important statement representing CARICOM, which expressed profound concern. This occurred on the 27th of May, it's a few days ago, expressed profound concern on the ongoing crisis affecting Cuba, and in a very measured statement outlined that the trade and economic embargo has been in place for over 6 decades, outlined the sovereign right of all nations, including Cuba, to import and receive fuel, and other very clear principled positions were carried in this statement. References to international law, references to the fact that Cuba poses no military threat to any nation, references to human rights, the impact of unilateral coercive measures, and the fundamental norms governing relations between sovereign states. For some reason yet to be explained by Minister Sobers or any one of his colleagues in the cabinet, Trinidad and Tobago saw fit to disassociate itself for the first time in our history from such a CARICOM statement. It begs the question, what really is our national policy on Cuba? All the while, Cuba has an ambassador here in Trinidad and Tobago, attending events, shaking hands, and, being in the same environment as the minister, while we are conducting the most bizarre policy with respect to the suffering occurring on that island. You had Minister Sobers making a declaration via the media. In terms of any embargo, this is in an Akash Samaru article in the Trinidad Guardian, where he says, the title is, TNT sending aid to Cuba but not backing embargo removal. Minister Sobers, in terms of any embargo and blockade, that's a bilateral situation between Cuba and the US. Nothing, my friends, could be further from the truth, and the reality of the current circumstances, sanctions and embargo on Cuba affects our financial institutions, or manufacturers, or distributors. Every single entity that engages in regional trade is affected by these circumstances. So this is not just a simplification, but a position of cowardice by Minister Sobers. The call again is for Trinidad and Tobago to refresh its position, to reattach itself, if that's possible for this government, to a principle of regional solidarity, and to identify at minimum with the human suffering of the people of Cuba. We also note that Trinidad and Tobago did not participate in CARICOM's effort to provide relief supplies, humanitarian supplies, to the Cuban people. At that stage, Minister Sobers said that we will be doing our own thing, utilizing unnamed organizations to provide relief items that the Cuban people will need. We have received no update. The information coming to us is that no humanitarian supplies have been delivered by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Yet another example of inconsistency and smoke and mirrors. While people are suffering, children are dying, fuel is absent, and power has been in very short supply to our brothers and sisters in Cuba. This is an issue that should not draw us into any confrontation or conflict with any of our large partners. Trinidad and Tobago's position and CARICOM's position has always been acknowledged and respected by the United States of America, the European Union, and all other partners. They've always said we acknowledge and we respect CARICOM's position on the issue of Cuba. Trinidad and Tobago has done a 180-degree reversal and has abandoned, once again, its responsibilities within CARICOM. So I will leave it there with those issues, and with respect to our position on the Security Council. The hard work is ahead. We in the opposition will be doing our part, as we always have, in holding this government and its representatives at those bodies to account every single day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Browne. Ask yourself if this government that represents you is worthy of representing you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, as they continue to make a mess of our interactions regionally and even internationally. Up next to speak further on the ways our democracy continues to be attacked, we welcome the Honourable Keith Scotland, SC, Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Pennelope Beckles Robinson, Senator Amery Browne, Honourable Colm Imbert. The mandate that we have is that at every meeting or every press conference that we have, we must speak with purpose. And the purpose of my contribution today deals with crime, particularly the recent continued attack on our democracy, and in particular, the Gazette that prohibited demonstrations and process, and that is Regulation 4 of the Emergency Powers Regulation that was just issued by the Commissioner of Police. Over the last several days in Trinidad and Tobago, we have witnessed events that should concern everyone, regardless of your political affiliation. And as the state of emergency reaches its expiration, we note that since this government has had control of governance in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been under a continuous state of emergency. My math tells me that this government has been in charge of our country for 398 days. And out of this, we in Trinidad and Tobago have been under a state of emergency for 257 days, some 66% of the time. That is something that must be a concern for every right-thinking citizen in Trinidad and Tobago, because extraordinary powers were sought from the Parliament on the basis that Trinidad and Tobago was facing an extraordinary threat from violent crime. And the government then asked this nation and asked us in Parliament to accept restrictions upon your ordinary freedoms. We were told that murder, gang violence, attack on ministers, attack on judges, they explained and they warranted these exceptional measures. I want to ask the country, how many gang leaders have been arrested under this present state of emergency? The answer is 0. The opposition says now, based on recent events, that we have reached a stage where citizens engage in legitimate civil participation and civil protests have become the focus of law enforcement instead of what was touted to us to be the reason for the continuation of the states of emergencies. Over the last several days, this country has witnessed arrest of citizens participating in the 19 Bullets 19 protest campaign, arising out of legitimate public concerns surrounding the death of Joshua Samaru and the subsequent charging of Seeley. These are legitimate concerns because the charging raises more questions than answers. And aren't people entitled, without breaching the sub judice rule, to ask these questions and to put their views in the public domain? There have been public reports now that Alyssa Phillips was arrested during a protest outside the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Jason De Silva was also arrested in connection with those events. And reports indicate now that Camille Carrasquero was also charged with disorderly behavior and with influencing public opinion in a manner prejudicial to public safety. When this clause was included in the regulations for the state of emergency, we raised an alarm, not because it wasn't included in the previous regulations under the PNM government, but in Parliament and both at this press conference here, both the leader of the opposition and myself, we said it is not the fact that the regulation is there, but how it will be weaponized. Because under the People's National Movement state of emergency in December 2024 and continuing into 2025, there were no such arrests under that section. Is Section 12. That section is now being weaponized to silence people, to silence legitimate voices who are expressing their views in what still remains a democracy. So on behalf of the opposition and on behalf of all right-thinking citizens in Trinidad and Tobago, we say we respect the judicial process, but we also respect the right of every citizen to express their unfettered view in a responsible way in a democracy. The government must explain to us why citizens' constitutional freedoms appear to be attracting this level of attention. Why law-abiding citizens who wish to express their views, who wish to express their constitutional rights, why is it that so much attention is being directed towards them, whilst bloodshed runs rampant in our country? And when we say something, we want to support it. By Sunday, in a span of just 12 hours, whilst Lucia Phillips, whilst Camille Carrasquero, they were being arrested, there were 7 murders in a 12-hour span in Trinidad and Tobago. And the locale and the locality of those 7 murders are very important. And we recognize that when a murder happens, there are secondary victims. And we understand that. Michael Joseph was stabbed to death in an altercation. That was in Faizabad. They say just a few doors down from the Honorable Prime Minister's constituency office, Jareel Hunt and Randolph Felix, they were victims of murder. In St. Madeleine, Martin Harry Prasad, Clary King Fook, and Anthony Ali Bokas were also murdered. This was in Penal. And there's a body that was discovered somewhere in First Caledonia. The point we wish to make as the opposition is that murder and crime is ubiquitous. It is not isolated to what is deemed to be, we say deemed to be, PNM-backed constituencies, because we say, when you look at the numbers, the entire country, PNM is a movement that represents Trinidad and Tobago. Whether you accept us or reject us, we put ourselves up for the entire of Trinidad and Tobago. But while citizens are being targeted by the forces that are there to protect us, 7 murders in 12 hours. That must be a cause for serious concern, because whilst our rights are being trampled, serious bloodshed and crime continues to plague our nation. There is now what we consider the criminalization of democratic participation. That is how I have couched it. It is the allegation that citizens have committed a criminal offense by influencing public opinion in a manner prejudicial to public safety. Trinidad and Tobago, influencing public opinion is not foreign to our democracy. In fact, it is not foreign to any democracy at all. Influencing public opinion on public issues is democracy. And we are saying that that arrest and that regulation, how it is being weaponized, is a direct, clear, and present danger to our democracy. In every elections, what do you think is being sought? Let us say that local government elections is called tomorrow under the state of emergency in the context of Regulation 12. So no candidate could go up on a platform and criticize the present regime. Will that be an act that is geared towards influencing public opinion in a matter prejudicial to public safety? Every election seeks to influence public opinion. Every speech seeks to influence public opinion. I am trying to influence public opinion now to say that this government does not have control of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And there is a great incompetence on the part of this government as it relates to dealing with crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago, in the fact that there is no plan. Is the plan Zozos or continuous states of emergency? Every parliamentary debate that we participate on seeks to influence public opinion one way or the other. Every speech delivered by the Honorable Prime Minister, be it on Instagram or whatever the Twitter, TikTok, seeks to influence public opinion. Every statement issued by a minister seeks to influence public opinion. Every contribution we make in Parliament seeks to influence public opinion. So what is the mischief here? The mischief here is that when this clause is weaponized in such a manner, it is to numb and it is to make people shy from expressing their views. The right to persuade one's fellow citizens, the right to advocate a position, the right to criticize government action, and the right to seek public support for a cause are not incidental freedoms. They are freedoms that have been fought for. And as I remember that right, and as I thought about it, I thought about Uriah Buzz Butler. And I wondered how he would have survived now, seeing the incarnation of the party that he helped to form. How he would have taken what is going on now in Trinidad and Tobago with unions that have history of protests, history of rebellion against colonial rule. How will that now mesh with what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago? It seems now, because of alliances, some very former powerful unions have been silenced. And that is a cause for concern for their membership. I will say no more on that. We say that the foundation principles upon which our democratic society rests must have leeway for the right to criticize government action. Not to threaten ministers, not to threaten public officials, but to criticize and earnest criticisms. This is why citizens are entitled to ask where the line is to be drawn between coercive powers of the state and powers of the state that are deployed to mute political expression of a differing view. Today, charges may be directed against one group of protesters. Tomorrow, it may very be directed against a media personnel who writes an article giving an opinion in a certain slant. And the constitutional principle remains sacrosanct for the People's National Movement. And we stand for freedom of expression in Trinidad and Tobago once it is done responsibly. The attack on democracy is an attack on accountability. And we have now moved from fighting crime to policing dissent. So we have gone now from a state of emergency that it was supposed to be against gang leaders and murderers to a state of emergency where people protesting outside public offices have been arrested. It is a cause for pause, and it is a cause for serious concern. The concern becomes even more acute when you examine the restrictions imposed under the regulation powers. The regulations, and let me be granular with the regulations to explain to the public, lest you run afoul of it, what is entailed. The regulations establishes 500 meters exclusion zones around the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and the parliamentary complex. The Office of the President, the Office of the Prime Minister, the Diplomatic Center, the Office of the Attorney General, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of the Defense, the Ministry of Homeland Security, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Piarco International Airport, A&R Robinson International Airport, Port Authority facilities, the headquarters of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and every police station throughout the Republic, the headquarters of the prison service and every prison and detention facility, and the headquarters of the Defense Force, together with every military base and barracks. The significance of this list is not merely the number of the locations. The significance lies with what those locations represents. We and the people who have been arrested, were not protesting outside private individual homes. They were not protesting outside schools or outside hospitals. They were protesting outside institutions of public authority, Parliament, the Office of the Prime Minister. Trinidad and Tobago, I want to take your memory back to when Parliament opened in September for this last term. Wasn't there a vast protest by this government supporters outside of the Parliament? A vast protest. They came out in their numbers. What has changed from September 2025 to now June 2026? And why is the media so silent on this? Is it just me who remembered it? There's always, let me not say that, but I can tell you that the People's National Movement would not have been allowed to get away with that. The media would have jumped on it because it is so glaring, and I have not heard one commentary. When we could not go to Parliament in peace, they were protesting, and you know what we did as members of the opposition? We took our pecan, and now we muted, and we went into Parliament and we conducted our business without any complaint whatsoever. No letter to the Speaker, no letter to the Clerk, because we understand that there's a democratic right for persons to express their views. But I want to go a little jurisprudentially about what protest means in Trinidad and Tobago and the rights of the citizens, and what these regulations and recent events mean in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a Court of Appeal decision, V.J. Ramai. Do you remember V.J. Ramai? He stood on the pavement in Woodford Square, a public square in our capital city, to voice his opinion on the negative effects of the COVID-19 restrictions that were imposed. It was a one-man protest. And he had a placard. If I recall, the placard was "Safe Zone discriminates and oppressive. Fix it now." The Court of Appeal gave a ruling in January about this protest and about the rights, because he was arrested and charged. And this is what the Court of Appeal had to say. This is our highest court in the land in Trinidad and Tobago, save and except the Privy Council. It says, and this is the ruling of the court, freedom to publicly express one's opinion, needs, desires, goals, recognized in our Constitution as a fundamental human right of thought and expression, is not a gift, but a cherished, recognized birthright. Giving voice within the contours of respect for the rights of others and having it heard gives life to the inclusivity in democratic life, the opportunity to assimilate that voice with shared goals of a future for our people, a satisfaction of our sense of interconnection and belonging in our own governance. So then, if we have no voice, we are robbed of our dignity. Let me repeat. So then, if we have no voice, we are robbed of our dignity. The Court of Appeal then paid particular attention to the historical and, I would think, the soul of Woodford Square. And this is what the Court of Appeal had to say. Ironically, Woodford Square itself, which sits across the Red House, is a powerful historical symbol in our country, well known as the People's Square. I pause now. No one can assemble outside the People's Square within 500 meters, but it goes on. It is our public space of debate and is the symbol of free speech. It lies between our parliament and the hall of justice in our capital city. No better juxtapositioning of the importance of free speech and the role of the court to protect it. The People's Square is a space mirroring the public debates in Parliament, the People's University. An expressive free zone in Woodford Square is well known as a sacred ground for free expression of thought and of expression. Indeed, it has been described as the University of Woodford Square, and this university, it brought political education to the people of the West Indies and introduced a new technique of cold intellectual political analysis based on reasoning and facts. In the university, there was participation of thousands of citizens in the program of political education. This is the Court of Appeal telling the country what the significance of Woodford Square is. And now, under this regime, no one can assemble as they did in September 2025 and voice their views outside Woodford Square now. This must be a cause for concern to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We are turning back the hands of time. What we are doing now is that we are moving from a state of emergency to a state of silence. Emergency powers may be necessary in exceptional circumstances, but they must never be the mechanism with which political dissent is discouraged, public criticism is suppressed, and democratic participation is chilled. And we on this side say the true test of democracy is not how a government treats those who support it, you know. It is how the government responds to those who disagree with it. And in Trinidad and Tobago, at this time, at this moment, there's a lot to disagree with. There's a lot to disagree with. And maybe there's a method to the madness. Maybe the government knows that and has now taken in front because there's a lot to disagree with. The opposition stands firmly in support of public safety, firmly in support of the rule of law, firmly in support of any legitimate effort to combine and to combat violent crime. But we equally stand firmly in defense of our Constitution and in defense of our freedom of expression. And particularly, we stand in defense of the right to peacefully assemble. We stand in defense of the right of citizens to hold those who are in power accountable. And we reject any approach that risks the transforming of Trinidad and Tobago into a state of silence. If citizens become fearful of speaking, fearful of assembling, then protests, they'll be fearful of protests. It is not merely individual liberty that is diminished, it is democracy that is diminished. As I close, I understand why Padarak took a shot at Nyla Blackman, because she could sing better than him and she could give them real performance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honourable Keith Scotland, SC Member of Parliament for Port of Spain South. We now welcome our Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Member of Parliament for Arima, the Honourable Pennelope Beckles, to address further matters that are affecting us as a society.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Rather, it's good afternoon. It's now 12:15. So, of course, let me acknowledge my colleagues who are here with me this morning. Senator, the Honourable Amery Browne, and my colleagues from the House, the Honourable Colm Imbert, as well as the Honourable Keith Scotland. And just to indicate, I have just a couple matters that I would like to address. But let me start by making reference to the vigil that is carded for this afternoon. I'm doing that because of, while sitting there, several persons have been expressing concerns about whether or not this event will be taking place, because the police issued a release a while ago as it relates to a march that was due to take place this afternoon, and that is, so that release came out just a short while ago, where they issued an advisory to the public ahead of this walk for peace, and indicated that the public needs to be reminded that the country is under a state of emergency and that no authorization has been granted for any public march or procession associated with this event. As a result of that, I have been seeing since yesterday several persons posting that the meeting organized for today, that meeting is off. So let me just make it abundantly clear that that meeting is on. You would be familiar with section 1093 of which requires that the Commissioner of Police to communicate in writing any prohibition of a meeting. We have had no such prohibition, but I will just advise you that pursuant to that section, we officially notified the Commissioner pursuant to law as it relates to that meeting. Information was requested. We provided the appropriate information. We did not seek approval for a march. It's not a march. This is a meeting that we are having, so that we expect, as is traditional, that we would have our peaceable and orderly meeting this evening at the Quasi. You are aware that last week we had a meeting in the constituency of the Honourable Marvin Gonzalez, a very successful meeting. So to those who are putting up on Facebook about our vigil and our meeting, I just welcome all of you who would like to attend, to wear white, and to walk with a candle. I would now like to go into some concerns that the opposition has. And I want to start by making reference to some statements made by the Prime Minister, the Member of Parliament for Saparia. And this is continuing the discussion by the Honourable Keith Scotland. And I want to ensure that I do not misquote and therefore I'm going to ask you to allow me to read from the Express. Citizens are free to protest, free to shut down the country, or free to turn up to work on any day. In our society, citizens are allowed to pursue their individual choices within the law. At the end of each month, every individual has to pay their bills, and therefore they should make choices that best suit them. Now, what does that really mean? You start to tell everybody, you're free to protest, you're free to shut down the country, but remember, you have bills to pay at the end of the month. Now, that is really a threat about your job. That's what it is. You want to go and march. Why are you going to pay your bills? So what is the Prime Minister really saying? And so I want to say to citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, you all really need to be very conscious of the contradictions and the hypocrisy of this Prime Minister. And as the Honourable Keith Scotland said, I was there in September, like Mr. Imbert and like Senator Browne. I mean, you all saw the thousands of, it was huge. And I mean, the Prime Minister was able to go, of course, across, and several of her ministers walked across, and everybody was shaking hands. We didn't have that luxury because they were saying a lot of things about the opposition. We know that when you look, most of the people over there were in yellow, some had some other colors. But they brought out those people to protest against us. And you know what is interesting is that this Prime Minister, now leading the United National Congress, a party, of course, formed by the Honorable Basdeo Pandey. And I wonder, I mean, I can't say that Mr. Pandey is turning in his grave because we know he was cremated. But I wonder, as somebody who formed this party, someone, the legacy of Mr. Pandey, somebody, the Oil Sugar Workers Union, for all the years that you now have a Prime Minister who is threatening people about protesting and who's saying to you, protest, go ahead, protest, shut down the country, but remember you have your bills to pay. Read between the lines and you'll understand what it is the Prime Minister is telling you. This same Prime Minister who now has a brand of wanting to cuff down people, to take away people's visa, to load up the matic, now she's saying to you, you want to protest? Protest. But remember you have your bills to pay. But I want to go a little further, because this Prime Minister would have formed a coalition with several other trade unions, and their support would have been responsible for her being in office today. So if you look at that Guardian headline, you would see that picture of the several trade unions that came together to ensure that the Prime Minister is in office today. So the question was asked about the unions and what is her response, because the unions are now saying that this particular clause, this 500-meter clause, is an attempt to clip the wings of the unions. But I want to say to the comrades, I want you to listen very carefully what the Prime Minister, the advice that she's giving to you. I suggest that the union should focus on working with the government on issues that would actually benefit their members. Every citizen can protest anywhere in the country besides these 15 places. I mean, isn't that amazing? For those of us who have been accustomed to the history of the trade union movement, the struggles, and recognize that Trinidad and Tobago, you can't separate Trinidad and Tobago and the trade union movement. Whether you think of Section 34, whether you think of Buds Butler, whether you think of Rafiq Shah, whether you think of George Weeks. And we know that it is not unusual to see members of the public, civil society, going to the diplomatic center, going to President's house. I am sure Mr. Imbert would tell you, I mean, it's not unusual for the trade union and other persons, farmers, to be protesting outside the Ministry of Finance. Normal. And people of Trinidad and Tobago, you need to ask yourself, what is this government afraid of? I mean, imagine you can't go by the airport. You can't go by A&R Robinson Airport in Tobago. You can't go on the promenade. I mean, what is it this government is afraid of? A government that, as I said, joined together with the trade union movement and is now telling them, you really should focus on working with us on issues that benefit your members. Well, we all know that on many occasions it's because of the blood and sweat of the trade union movement, marching and protesting, that a lot of their workers have benefited. This is a prime minister, for years, when the prime minister was in opposition, protested. But all of a sudden, in government, she has a difficulty with people protesting and telling you want to protest, protest, but don't protest in the areas where I tell you that you can't protest. And so what is it? This is now government through fear. This is government through a prolonged state of emergency. And of course, a gradual development of a police state. But I want to remind you that whenever we speak about the Prime Minister, we need to go back to what the Prime Minister said to you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I need to remind you. And in her swearing in, our highest priority, and I'm quoting, our highest priority will be not just to communicate with you, but to commune with you. I will never be detached from your feelings and aspirations. I will never do one thing while the country cries out for their needs. I will always be listening. I will be following you. You will be my priority. You will always know that you have leaders who cares and understands your problems. That is what the Prime Minister told the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And then the Prime Minister talked about patriotism, because the Prime Minister believes that she's the only person that is patriotic. And the people who want to protest, and the people who want to march, and the people who have a concern with Joshua Samaru and Kaya Seeley, those people are not patriotic. This is her definition of patriotism. Patriotism is ensuring everybody wins. For me, patriotism means speaking up, having a voice. It means not staying silent to eat a food while the poor and working classes are being abused or taken advantage of. That is what her definition of patriotism is. But what happens now? You look on the front page, Kamala rejects union's call to scrap SOE restrictions, preventing demonstration outside state institutions. And I only hope that the people of Trinidad and Tobago continue to pay very close attention to what is going on as it relates to this government. The Honorable Keith Scotland told you about Woodford Square. But the last time that protests were denied around the Red House was since, I think, in the 19th century, the water riots. This government is taking us backward. No plans, no care, no concern, no sympathy. They are only concerned about keeping people silent. And anyone, or any organization that they believe is a threat to them, they will do whatever is necessary to make sure that you're either going to be arrested, you're going to be charged, you're going to be put in fear. Because we need to remember that they spoke about cell phones and expressing fear to people about conversations on cell phones. And that is what we are reaping now, having put this government in office. I want to remind you now, as I talk a little bit about the whole issue of crime. It was just about 2 or 3 weeks ago in the Parliament that Wayne Sturge, echoing the comments of his Prime Minister, spoke about the fact that the majority of crimes were taking place in P&M constituencies. But they always say, the law don't sleep, So shortly thereafter, you have a triple murder and a double murder and another murder in where? South Trinidad. And the double murder not far from the police station in Penal. And in whose constituency? The Prime Minister. But you would have the whole world believe that every crime that is committed in P&M constituencies. And as we speak, the murder toll now is 156. And this government would have you believe that crime is down. My information around this time, it was just over 160. So let them bring to you the evidence to show that crime is down. I want the Prime Minister to understand that when the Prime Minister speaks about crime, there is no race in crime, there is no politics in crime. And you want to utilize circumstances to convince the people of Trinidad and Tobago that something miraculous takes place in P&M constituencies. I want to further say to the Prime Minister that crime does not discriminate based on political affiliation. Bullets do not ask whether the victim supports the UNC or whether they support the P&M. And criminals do not check constituency boundaries in determining where crime is committed. The Prime Minister needs to tell us, 1 year in office, where is your crime plan? Because it is sadly lacking. On Friday, we go back to Parliament. And we expect that this government is going to come back with a ZOSO bill. 2 interesting things that will be happening. The state of emergency will come for further extension because the question was asked by a Guardian reporter. Are you going to extend the state of emergency? And of course, the novel response is that she would be advised by the Security Council. But we know very well that they're coming back with a state of emergency. If you convince the population that the only way you will deal with crime is through a state of emergency, then you have to come back for a state of emergency. But further to that you're going to come back with a ZOSO bill where you would not need a special majority and where you would not need the support of the independent senators and you would not need the support of the opposition. You're going to come back with that bill so you can pass that bill with a simple majority. Now, this is the same government that spoke about consultation. This is the same government that said to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that said to the business community, that once you got this stand your ground legislation, crime will be reduced, there will be less invasions. I want to ask you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, whether or not anybody has been charged under the stand your ground legislation. This piece of legislation where they had consultations throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago, because that's their mantra, consultations. But I want to ask you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, whether they have had any consultations with you on the Zoso bill. As a matter of fact, they made it absolutely clear when the bill went to the Senate that they weren't going to consult with the opposition. They weren't interested in the views of the opposition. As a matter of fact, you remember that that is the same bill that the Prime Minister said that there were independent senators that were asking for favors to vote. I am calling on the Prime Minister today, months later, to name the independent senators who were calling for favors, because it cannot be that the Prime Minister can stand up in the Parliament or elsewhere and make serious accusations that they are corrupt independent senators, but the Prime Minister names not one single independent senator. And interestingly enough, you're now going to come back to the Parliament and you're going to bring the same Zoso bill, but in bringing that bill, you are not requiring the support of the opposition. Now, I have said time and time again that we are willing to work with the government, but it's very clear that the government is not willing to work with the opposition. Because if they were willing to do that, they would at least consider the recommendations and the amendments that were made by the opposition. But before a debate, before a contribution of anyone, independent to opposition, the government gets up and says, we will not consider any amendments. So the people of Trinidad and Tobago must know that this government, if they have their way, will keep us under a perpetual state of emergency. And I want to remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago that during the period 2010 to 2015, under the same Kamla Prasad Bissessar, as soon as they got into office, they implemented a state of emergency. And more than 8,000 persons were arrested, very few charged, and even very few convicted. And what did it result in? The taxpayers having to pay millions and millions of dollars for persons who were kept in custody. Are we seeing anything different? Fellow citizens, you must never forget that this government came to us and they told us that there were threats to the judiciary, threats to the police, threats to members of parliament, and therefore the state of emergency was necessary. That it was necessary to have people held down at the barracks. But lo and behold, the state of emergency came to an end and everybody was released. And they told the public that those persons that were being held were the type of persons that must be kept away from the public because of the threats. How is it that those persons have since been released without being charged? Is this a government that you can trust? Absolutely no. I want to say to the public, because very often people ask, well, what is your solution and what would you do differently? The People's National Movement took a decision as it relates to body cameras. And in September of 2025, this government revealed, when a question was filed by Senator Dan Paul in the Senate to Roger Alexander, a question was asked. And Roger Alexander indicated that some $24.9 million was allocated for the award of a contract to purchase cameras, 3,000 body cameras. That contract was awarded in 2024. When this government got into office, they indicated that they were canceling that to save money. I saw today where the government has finally decided that they will go ahead with body cameras. We know very well the importance of technology. So when you talk about what the PNM will do, the importance of body cameras, and we understood the importance of technology. Because if we are to deal with crime, we recognize that we must go the way of technology. And we assure you that when we return to government, our promise of continuing the use of body cameras and our continuation of the use of technology as it relates to fighting crime will be a priority. There are just two other matters that I want to deal with, and it has to do with the issue of non-payment and outstanding monies as it relates to culture. It is a shame that this government is treating our national instrument in this way. A shame. And I want to ask, where is Missing Michelle? Missing Michelle of Moruga, who told us that this was going to be the best carnival ever. Flavor Village. And what has happened since Flavor Village? The majority of contractors and the majority of employees who participated in that and the artists still have not been paid. From the best carnival ever. I want to remind you that in 2025, on April the 15th, $25 million in prize money was paid by the Ministry of Culture. And in 2024, April the 8th, a further $16 million was paid at that time. I want to ask this government, where is the money for the pan players? Where is the money for the calypsonians? Where is the money for the mass men? Where is the money for Parang? Where is the money for Best Village? Where is the money? This is a continuation of a practice of this government, of people getting salary late. The same program that Khadija Amin is boasting about on the back of the Express today. You know, most of the people ain't get paid yet. And you, Cabinet, approved a program with no money. So they now have to, the corporations are not the ones to decide who is employed. It is the government. But now you're taking money from the corporations to pay the workers. But you're coming to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and you are saying, no ghost, no ghost. We understand that they don't have a choice. This is the same Prime Minister that spoke about Trinidad and Tobago being a lawless dump. The Prime Minister clearly did not understand what would happen when you send home all the CPEP workers, when you send home all the URP workers, when you send home all the reforestation workers, and even up to yesterday, they sent home workers from the HDC. This Prime Minister who told you about being caring and loving and sympathetic, not a lack of sympathy or empathy or compassion. That is Kamala Prasad Bisesa. And if it was different, she would not have sent home all of these people. But you're telling people, protest if you want to protest. But remember, every month, you have to pay your bills. And therefore, you have to make choices. That is the Prime Minister that we are dealing with. I'm calling on the Minister of Culture and the Prime Minister, please, please, pay the Pan people their money. Pay them the money. They worked for it. And Carnival is only once a year. And like you, they need their money. Because when you complained about the increases in salaries for members of parliament, and you criticize the PNM government, guess what? You take it. 90,000. Right? 90,000 a month, you take it. You didn't say that you will keep the old salary. Every single one of you, the largest cabinet in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, causing taxpayers millions of dollars, all of all year. Normal, having criticized the increase in salary, normal, you'll take the money. My last two issues has to do with reminding the Minister of Public Utilities. You are cautioning people about freedom of expression, especially outside the workplace. I need to remind you that it is a fundamental right for citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So, the fact that you're not happy with Nyla Blackman speaking about people having empathy, because I know it hit hard. It hit hard when somebody say, oh, they don't have empathy. I know how you're feeling, but that is how the average Trinidad and Tobago persons feel. That's how the citizens feel. And if you take a poll right now from the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago as to whether this government has any empathy, whether they have any sympathy, and whether they have any compassion, I don't feel they're getting a single vote. So the fact that you want to probably threaten her, because we know you're responsible for B-Mobile, and you're probably sending a little signal to her. But focus on ensuring that people get water. Boasting about fixing 30,700 pipeline leaks. Similar to the statement about how many people get employed. Because you want to give the impression that under the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, he wasn't doing the work. That's the impression you want to give. I want you to list the 30,000 plus leaks that you fix. I want to use the opportunity on behalf of my colleagues here, Colm Imbert, Keith Scotland, Hans Devines, who is chairing, and myself. The people from Diego Martin want water in their pipe. The people from Arima want water in their pipes. We need it. So focus on that, rather than going to tell Nyla Blackman about what she should and shouldn't say. Because that is no different to what they did with Helen Francis.
Censorship.
And taking off the mic, you know. And whilst they're taking off the mic on, so you know they give instructions to take off the mic. And that the Prime Minister will say that tents are dying. So tents are dying, so you create flavor. And having created flavor, you're still paying people money. We go to Parliament on Friday for the start of a new session. And both houses, the Senate as well as the House, will be meeting at the same time. I have had the honor as the opposition leader under the Constitution to appoint 6 senators. And now that we have a new session of Parliament, my policy from time to time will be to rotate senators, so that on Friday, when the Parliament opens, I propose to make some adjustments. And at that time, I will make my announcement. In making that decision, I have considered many factors. I have considered the fact that there has been a matter before the Privileges Committee, and whilst there are those who argued about me taking time, I understand the importance of the judicial process and justice, natural justice in particular. And I know that it was very important to ensure that natural justice took place. As a lawyer myself of more than 30 years, I recognize the importance of the right to be heard. So that on Friday, considering all the factors, including the fact that I do have before me offer of resignation, together all that has transpired over the last couple weeks or months, and my right to rotate from time to time, which is what I will be doing, not just on Friday, but I also propose to do that over the next couple of years and months. As I said, I will be making an adjustment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leader. Members of the media, we are now open to your questions. As always, just raise your hand. We'll have a microphone passed to you, and you just identify the media house which you represent. We actually have one question for Senator Browne that we are going to start with. This one is actually from Prior Bihari. He's asking, what is your comment on the Trinidad and Tobago's securing a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council for the 2027 to 2028 term, given that the Prime Minister said she was the one that lobbied for this in September? And would this impact our relation with CARICOM and Venezuela in any way?
So, thank you very much, Prior Bihari, and those who would have posed the question. It's pretty straightforward. This opposition always wants the best for Trinidad and Tobago. There's not a single candidature or campaign or candidate that we've ever sought to impede or resist. That being said, we take our role very seriously in holding the government to account. So even with respect to this UN Security Council campaign for a non-permanent seat, the record is clear. The foundation for this candidature was laid years ago. We told Trinidad and Tobago, as part of our justification for pursuing the presidency of the General Assembly back in 2023, that position would be an important fulcrum or launching point for the success of the Security Council campaign to come. We were successful in having Ambassador Dennis Francis serve for that period as the President of the General Assembly, and he did exactly that. Laid the foundation, advanced a pillar of strength for the success of this candidature. So in all of the celebration and tribute, that's par for the course. I would want some space to recognize that beyond the politicians who would have contributed, and there were several across administration, there are also public servants, foreign service officers, and individuals who have been working for years to ensure that we succeed with the candidature. But as I said a few moments ago at this media conference, it's not a case, this is not an end in itself. The question is, over these 2 years, will little Trinidad and Tobago be able to authentically carry the values, standards, and ideals of our people to that important forum? Will we be carrying the voice of a warmonger prime minister? Will we be carrying the voice of a cabinet that does not care about international law, freedom of speech, human rights, democracy, and the other principles that have built Trinidad and Tobago? Will we be carrying the voice of the Caribbean community, which is what we offered to CARICOM to achieve their endorsement, which stands to this day? Those are the critical questions. So thank you, Prior. We are very pleased. We participated, and many others participated in this accomplishment. But it's not just what you reach for. What do you do when you are there? This is not a forum for just empty posturing. This is what the world depends on to prevent wars and ensure peace will prevail. Human lives are at stake, and God help us if we go there simply to be part of an echo chamber or echo the voice of others, as opposed to the opportunity to carry the authentic, sovereign voice of Trinidad and Tobago, which, yes, can make a difference even at that forum if we stay true to the principles that make us who we are as a nation. So those are my comments. I think there was a supplemental about implications for Venezuela. I don't want to get too deeply into that. We're not in the practice of engaging in negative speculation. What we can say is, over the last year, a lot of declarations, statements, rhetoric has come from Port of Spain on the issue of Venezuela. And our question today at the beginning of June the 3rd, 2026, has the interests of this country truly been sought and achieved in those matters? So a note of caution for our representatives and the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Now you have a bigger platform and a bigger stage. Carefully consider your words and positions and votes and declarations, because the implications go far beyond pleasing some friend and can affect the future of this country and our ability to feed, develop, and secure ourselves long beyond any particular political dispensation. That's my response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Browne. We now go to members of the media present. By all means, Amery.
Hi, good day. I don't have much questions today, so we're short. Go back to MD Imbert. We'll address the maxi taxi operators, because that's something currently happening, right? Right. You would have stated that it is your understanding that Minister Zakru said that he made absolutely no commitments to any solutions in writings whatsoever, and it appears as though you would have been speaking to the maxi taxi operators. So is it that you had conversations with the maxi taxi operators and that they would have shared that with you this week? And if so, when did you have talks with them?
Yes. Yesterday.
Yesterday. All right, okay. In speaking with the maxi taxi operators, did they share that any of these concerns were new concerns? Because it is a lot of the concerns that they would have shared are things that would have existed for several years now. So is it that any of these new concerns are new concerns to you, or is it that they sounded familiar to you?
Well, they are very new because you have a new minister who is refusing to give them any commitments. That never happened before.
But
He point blank refused to give them any commitments in writing to address any of the issues that they raised. So that's very new.
Okay. But are the concerns from the operators new?
I think their main concern, I listened to them, is that he's not telling them anything.
Okay. So
That's their problem. It's a problem of communication. When I spoke this morning, I said, they're disconnected. The people want answers, yes or no. We want to hear something. And he's not telling them anything. In fact, what their main complaint was, he was telling them about all the work he's doing. But they said, what work? There's no evidence of any work. This man is living in a dreamland. So that's very new, that you have a minister dealing with a very important sector, the transportation sector. You go to the minister and say, look, these are our issues. What do you have to say? And he says, I'm not going to tell you anything. Okay, that is new.
Right. So let's go to some of the concerns. One of the main concerns that they would have had is the fact that the current speed limit is 65 kilometers per hour, and they would like it to be increased to up at least 80 kilometers per hour. Now, there was an increase, as you would have mentioned, in the light motor vehicles a few years ago, and that would have been under a former PNM administration. So why wasn't the limit increased for maxi taxi operators or maxi taxis at that time as well?
I will tell you something. The election was held on April 28, 2025. Today is June the 3rd. I think a year is enough time for a new government to deal with these issues. What you are doing is giving the new ministers a free pass. They are in government now. 1 year is enough. You can't give them a 5-year honeymoon period. So I suggest you direct your question to the new government, the people who can make decisions. And that's what's upsetting the maxi taxi operators. That's what they told me. They go to the new decision maker who made so many promises. Remember, everybody wins, eh? So they had all these issues. They went to him, and for 1 year, nothing. So I suggest you direct that question to the new administration.
Okay, I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm asking a question.
No, I'm dead serious.
No, I understand, and when I'm presented the opportunity, I will. But I'm asking, is that was any considerations made to increase the speed limit at the time the speed limit was increased during the former administration when you were sitting minister at the time, not that minister, but you were sitting minister, to increase at then? I'm asking during that period. And the reason why I'm asking, because I too have been speaking to the maxi taxi operators since last week when they announced that there would be a protest. I was outside of the Ministry of Transport for over 5 hours out waiting for the meeting and spoke to the operators. And that concern is not new. So I'm asking, were any considerations made at that time for it to be increased? And if so, why wasn't it increased?
And I will say the same thing. You are giving this government a free pass.
But that doesn't answer the question.
That answers my question. Why are you giving them a free pass? Why are they being confronted with their own incompetence and the fact that they have so much contempt for the people of this country, and they refuse to answer serious questions? Go and ask the Minister of Transport that question. He's in charge now. He can make a recommendation to Cabinet to increase the speed limit for maxi taxis. It doesn't have to go to 80, as I said. It could go to 70. It could go to 75. You ask him. He's the decision maker. Okay?
Not a problem.
Are you going to do this for the next 5 years? Talk about PNM?
Are you going to not answer questions
I
posed to you for the next 5
am
years?
telling you, 1 year is enough time for them to get their act together
No problem.
and to behave like a government.
Okay. So you were mentioning payments being made for the transportation of students, and then you also, for children, you also mentioned that you don't remember a protest like this taking place. So let me take you back
No,
to...
I did not say that. I don't remember an all-out strike all over the country, a 3-day strike by all maxi taxi operators. That's what I said.
Understood. But let me take you back to September 2018 when there was a strike by maxi taxi operators, specifically the ones that were transporting children at the time, and they were protesting for payments to be made by the former government, and they were protesting for you, Minister, to make those payments. So I am raising that to you because these concerns are not a new concern. It doesn't matter who is in government at the time. The fact is that these concerns remain the same. So I'm asking, at that time, were any considerations made, and therefore the amounts that are being owed now, according to some of the operators, are the things that were owed since then? So any response to that?
I was very clear about what I said, you know. For 2026, we are in 2026. The amount owed to the maxi taxi operators who transport the nation's school children, of which there are over 250,000, is $7 million. And I see you've gone 8 years back in time. Okay? 2018 is 8 years ago. At that time, there was not a 3-day strike by all maxi taxi operators in the country. I am telling you, you cannot find a single instance where every single maxi taxi operator in Trinidad and Tobago has decided to go on strike because of unresolved issues and because of the behavior and the attitude of the government. So you could continue that line of questioning, but we are in 2026. Stop giving the government a free pass. Okay? Thank you.
No, I wasn't finished. One more question.
You want to give them another free pass? No problem. Go ahead.
Okay, so that's to put it on the record. Every single maxi taxi operator was not striking. There were maxis on the road at some point in time, but the majority, right? In addition to that, at any point in time between, I think you mentioned the 1990s when Citygate, we're talking about upgrades now, right?
I did not say that. I said I was the minister that created Citygate when I was the minister in 1994-95. That's what I said.
So from 1994 up until the day that you were no longer the minister, or the PNM was no longer in government last year, were there any upgrades made to Citygate, including the hubs that the maxi taxi operators are currently lobbying about?
Amery, I was last the Minister of Works in 2010.
You were a member of Cabinet?
I was last the Minister of Works in 2010. 16 years ago. However, I happen to know that there was constant upgrade and improvement to Citygate. What I can tell you, go and see whether there's any allocation in the 2026 budget for upgrade and maintenance of maxi taxi hubs in Trinidad and Tobago. Read your own newspaper, where you have the Minister of Works and the Minister of Transport saying neither of them are responsible for the maxi taxi hubs. Stop giving them a free pass.
I'm fully
Go
aware.
and speak to them. You commented that it was your paper that said.
Absolutely.
The two of them are saying, not me. So who it is? If it is not the Minister of Works and it is not the Minister of Transport responsible for maxi taxi hubs, who is? The PNM? Stop giving the government a free pass.
Is that a yes or no to the upgrades? I didn't get the answer.
I answered you. I was very clear. I said there were continuous maintenance and upgrades over the period.
When was the last time there was an upgrade?
I can't give you that information. Honestly, I told you I was last Minister of Works 16 years ago. I'm sorry. Okay? My memory bank does not have that kind of knowledge.
Just remember everything. I was surprised that you
Thank you, Kimberly.
Just now.
All right. Thank you very much, the Honorable Colm Imbert, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin Northeast. We'll take one more question, and then we'll wrap, and we just want to remind the viewing public that we do have the candlelight vigil this evening. We gather from 5:30 p.m. and we begin at 6:30 p.m. in the Kweze in San Juan, and we ask you to join us and stand up for democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, we ask that you wear white as we stand for our country and for peace. Kimberly?
So, Ms. Beckles, do you have any concern about the vigil this afternoon? Because we know when persons gather, and you know what you mentioned earlier, that there's a heavy police presence there.
Yes.
Do
Well, you
have-
mean because Mr. Alexander said he's coming to protest, that one? He said he's coming where we are. Philip Alexander said he's coming to protest. Certainly from where I sit, I mean, we have had several meetings. We have had no difficulty. This is not going to be any different from any other meeting, save and except, I mean, it's a vigil. We understand what is going on, crime. We understand what is happening, the concerns of the country following the death of Joshua Samaru and what is happening with Kia Silly, what's happening with Alyssa Phillip. We don't expect that. This is intended strictly to be a peaceful meeting and a peaceful vigil, just as we have had in all our previous meetings. And I mean, we are making it very clear to our supporters who are coming, that's the purpose of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank everyone for viewing. We also want to thank members of the media for being here with us. We look forward to seeing you this evening at our candlelight vigil, and we remind you that the opposition of Trinidad and Tobago, we stand in defense of the people, and we stand especially today because there's clearly an attack on democracy. We thank you.